Hey folks, thanks for watching my channel today. My name's Don and my channel's all about fishing after the age of 70. Today though, I want to talk about a little different topic. I want to talk about Mother Nature and what's happened here just in the last, really the last week or so. You may or may not have noticed if you've been out on any of the lakes here, particularly in talking about South Florida, South Central Florida. Um, I live in Highlands County, which is about 45 miles north of Lake Okeechobee. We've got a lot of lakes in this area, probably 100 or more. I think I've fished them all at one time or another in the last 30 years. Uh, but specifically, we have two large lakes in this area, and that would be Lake Istapoca and Lake Okeechobee. Um, the reason I mention those lakes is they're relatively shallow. And although we have other lakes that are deep, like Lake Placid and Lake June, the shallow lakes tend to be affected more by this rash of cold weather that we've had just in the last 2 weeks. Again, unless you're down here with me, you probably don't realize it, but we actually had a number of nights that got down into the 20s. And for us, that's cold. I mean, that's really cold. The daytime highs ranged from, the low 50s to the low 60s. And for most of us, we moved down here for a reason to get away from that damn cold weather that you folks up north seem to enjoy. Uh, so this last couple of weeks was kind of hard on us. But but anyway, what I want to talk about today is not the effect that the weather had on us, but rather the effect that the weather had on some of the invasive species that inhabit our waterways. Some time ago, I wrote an article about tilapia. And for those of you that may not know what a tilapia is, go to the grocery store because now in the frozen food section you'll see a lot of tilapia fillets. In fact, I think you'll find them probably in the fresh meat department as well. It's gotten to be a pretty popular food item, and although those tilapia generally aren't from Florida, South Florida, most of them I think come in from overseas. They're not a bad eating fish. I'm not a fan of them. But here in our lakes, particularly the couple of shallow lakes that I mentioned, they're a major nuisance. Uh, Anybody that's fished these lakes, Lake Istapoca, where I fish all the time, or even Okeechobee, you'll see schools of tilapia, and they'll be as big as 2 feet, sometimes larger. I mean, we're talking huge. They're not just a small, just not just a small invasive species. They're large. And quite often, because they'll compete for the same areas as largemouth bass, they'll actually run a largemouth bass right off their bed. And they're not so much, a problem in terms of eating the same foods or the same food sources as largemouth bass because they're primarily a vegetarian, so they're eating a lot of bugs, a lot of grass, algae, that type of thing. But they will, from time to eat almost anything. And the larger they get, the more likely they are to really invade the areas that we tend to fish in. But what's happened, and it's happened all over, is because of this cold weather and because tilapia are an invasive species that came from a much warmer climate, they can't tolerate cold. I mean, they can't tolerate the water getting too cold. And what's happened here is with this rash of 28 degrees for 2 and 3 nights in a row, it drove the water temperature down quite a bit. And I've heard reports that it got down into the 40s. I don't really believe that. I think it's more likely that it probably got into the low 50s. But whatever it did, it was enough to kill off tons of tilapia. If you go to either of the lakes, Lake Istapoca or Lake Okeechobee, if you go in the direction the wind's blowing, you're going to find hundreds, if not thousands, of not only tilapia, but you're also going to find other species of fish that are also invasives. I've had a number of people tell me that for every tilapia they've seen a half a dozen Mayan cichlids. And again, a Mayan cichlid is kind of like well, some of them are actually Oscars, which I've raised in many of my tanks. I actually have 6 pretty good sized Oscars right now in my garage, albino Oscars. But those are actually bred to be tropical fish. These are wild versions of Oscars. And the Mayan cichlids, again, they can't tolerate cold water. Most invasives can tolerate water that gets down to about 65. Once it gets below 65, there's the danger that they're not going to survive. And this is true also of peacock bass, but I haven't heard any reports of any peacock bass being affected. Now, we don't have peacock bass as far north as Lake Istapoca, but there are some probably in Lake Okeechobee, if not in the lake itself. There may be some in the canals or some of the other waterways that are close by. I think the farther south you go, and you get into the canal systems down around Fort Lauderdale and into Miami, that's where you're more likely to see a larger abundance of peacock bass. But there's also, clown knife fish. Uh, there's an occasional snook. There's some tarpon. They all find their way into Lake Okeechobee. And although I haven't heard any reports of tarpon, snook, or clownfish, washing up on the shorelines dead from the cold front, there's a possibility some of them could have been affected as well. I have heard some reports over in the Gulf area that there have been a number of snook killed, usually in the northern areas from pretty much from Fort Myers going north. If there were snook up in that area, the water just got too cold for them. But isn't it interesting how, we have created the problem? I say we, most of these invasive species came as a result of tropical fish enthusiasts like myself who either purposely or inadvertently, let fish go in our lakes and streams. And, because they could survive in the warmer weather, they started to populate the areas. And, it's now grown into a full-scale invasion. I mean, we have the same problem with, many of the snakes down in this area, lizards. If you're from up north, you've probably heard about the python problem we have down here, the boa constrictors. Again, most of those came about because hobbyists raised the snakes, and when the snakes got too big, they let them go. Unfortunately, they don't really have any known uh, adversaries out there. So, outside of maybe an alligator, which as they get even bigger, they're more a threat to an alligator than an alligator is to them. But now the big snakes are roaming all over South Florida, and they're all invasive species. Lizards, same thing. Up here where I'm at, we have lizards that are 4 or 5 inches long. Down south of us, when you get down into areas like the uh, south end of Okeechobee or down into Fort Lauderdale and Miami, you'll find lizards down there that are sometimes 2 and 3 feet long. And what's interesting about the lizards is when it gets cold like this and you have a cold spell, a lot of times they'll be up in a tree and they get so cold they'll just fall out of the tree and lay on the ground until they kind of thaw out. Doesn't kill them. It just kind of numbs them. A lot of times people go around and pick them up. It makes for an interesting picture, if nothing else. But again, going back to the invasive species, particularly the tilapia, isn't it interesting how Mother Nature comes in and kind of solves the problem, which is exactly what's happened. Because of the cold spell, and this is a severe cold spell, we haven't had one like this in quite a while. But because of the cold spell, all of a sudden, a lot of the tilapia and other invasive fish are just wiped out. So now we've got kind of a fresh start. There's still some in the lakes, but we've got kind of a fresh start. Again, there's still not much we can do about it, but it should be far less damaging over the next year or two than it has been up to this point. Anyway, that's my take on it. Just thought I'd share that with everybody. Thanks for watching my video today. And, if you would, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you have any comments, please leave them down below. Thanks again.